welcome to our weekly Sunrise Call. I'm so grateful that all of you are here with us this morning, especially on the holiday weekend. We are here together in this moment of solace and peace as we really work to help heal each other and heal ourselves and heal our children, one person, one parent, one child at a time. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm so excited to have Dr. Linda back this morning with us. Dr. Linda has been with us since the very beginning of SonRise, almost 4 years ago. Can't even believe it's been almost 4 years. And she was our very first expert and has been a friend of mine for over 20 years, working and walking with my family through this journey of life, and every day getting up and looking for that sunrise. So many of you have met Dr. Linda before, but I will just share with you that Dr. Linda McGhee is a clinical psychologist, attorney, and nationally recognized mental health expert and speaker. She has been featured in the Washington Post, Forbes, New York Times, Huffington Post, Grown and Flown, and most recently on BET's America in Black special on the state of mental health in the Black community. She has provided commentary for Washingtonian Magazine on the intersection of racial trauma, COVID-19, and mass protests. And she's an author of a chapter in a book on bipolar disorder and the essentials of multicultural assessment, which we talked a lot about last week.
Yeah.
She has served on the clinical faculty at the Washington School of Psychiatry and is a former adjunct professor at George Washington University and the Chicago School of Professional Psychology.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
not enough.
you,
I'm going to put a couple
Kelli.
more sentences I got to say.
I was trying to cut you off.
I'm just going to say this. And you've served as the former president of the American Psychological Association, and you just do so much with organizations, with companies, and most importantly, with people like us, because all of us have our journey and our path, and you have been such a tremendous light on my journey. So I want to say thank you as I turn it over to you. So this morning, it's really a continuation of last week's conversation. Last week, Dr. Christy Hay, which is a phenomenal, she is a phenomenal pediatrician and TED speaker and on. She spoke with us last week around learning differences and the importance of accommodations, how important they are and how important it is to get tested. And so this week, Dr. Linda McGhee is going to continue that conversation, as many of us have children that have just started back at school, or who might be starting back at school, or who may be in college, or maybe at home. But, how can we help our children if we know that accommodations are needed? That is the topic for this morning. So I'm grateful for you, Dr. Linda, and happy to turn it over to you right now. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. I am really, really pleased to be here this morning and this Labor Day weekend. And I want to start off with a story. When I first started to test and do assessments, I had one of my first clients was a young African-American female, and she had just finished her undergraduate work at the University of North Carolina. And she wanted to go to law school, but she struggled so much in undergrad, struggled with completing things on time, struggled with heavy reading assignments, organizing papers. But because she grew up poor, she had never been tested. So I tested her, and I came to the conclusion that she had learning disorders and she had ADHD. And of course, she had a lot of emotional pressure on her because of those two things, which we don't often account for. What ended up happening, though, was because she didn't have that history of accommodations, the law school admissions testing and the law school would not give her accommodations. And so this show is about accommodations and how to get them, but it really should be called There's a Game The game has rules, right? And a lot of people in communities of color don't understand that there is a game, that there are rules that go with the game, and that one of the ways to get their child where they need to be is to understand and play this game. So, another little side fact, Kelly, I want to just make people aware of before I get started is that when your child is in these private schools, of nearly between a third and sometimes as much as 40% of children have accommodations. So the schools that I work with in the DMV, the District Maryland, Virginia, as we call it, that I have white parents running to me for accommodations and Black people running away from me for accommodations because they are afraid of stigma and they're afraid of they're dealing with their own trauma. So this is going to be a talk about accommodations. But again, Kelly and I really want to keep it on a real level and talk about what keeps us from getting help for our children, right? So what's an accommodation, right? An accommodation is anything that you can think of that can help your child or an adult, because I want to get on that too, because there are workplace accommodations in addition to school accommodations. Um, it's just something that will satisfy a need. It'll help you perform better in the circumstances you find yourself in, right? And there can be we'll talk more about them, and I hope you all have questions about them, but there are accommodations in schools that have people read the test to you, right? There are people that will write your answers out. You can get, most of you have heard about extended time, which is probably the most commonly requested accommodation, particularly in private school and competitive academic programs. So in other words, if the test takes 2 hours, typically you would get 3 hours to complete it. And you know what happens is that children perform better when they have more time, right? There's accommodation so that if your child has ADHD, they can write their answers directly in the test book. They don't have to transfer them over in that little fill in the circle thing, which has a name, right? But what happened with the case of mine, I'll tell you a story, is that I think that a kid that I tested ended up scoring very low because he was one off on his answers, right? And so he basically got most of them wrong because he was bubbling into the wrong number. So you can get an accommodation where you can circle your answer in the question book as opposed to having to transfer it, which is often very difficult if you have ADHD. Other accommodations are smaller room that your child, if they're distractible, they can take their tests in another room. You can take tests over days if they're so long. And you have to have a seasoned professional help you work through this, because oftentimes you think you want all the accommodations. But for example, if your child is really, really anxious, having more time might make them just give them more time to be anxious. So you have to have someone that can help you, sit down with you, and work through what accommodations work best for your children. Kelly, you have anything so far?
Well, I
Anyone
just
have
think
any
a question
questions?
around is, what do you think the right time is to get accommodations?
As soon as
Mhm.
possible. Okay, that was one of my things I was going to say for later, but it bears repeating. With your child, anything that comes up, you're better off facing it early. The longer the runway, the better off you are. If you come to me with a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old who has learning difficulties, who has learning challenges, who has ADHD, who has autism, it's much better to have that early diagnosis because we know what we're facing, we know what we're dealing with, we know where to allocate resources. And I think that I'm a very good tester. I teach assessment, obviously, it's one of my specialties. But I think one of the things that I work best with people of color with is to figure out how to allocate resources, what to advocate for in the school, what to go to the mat for, what to borrow money for, what can wait. And then to realize that you have to nurture a whole child, right? You're not just nurturing an academician. You're nurturing a whole child. You want a whole healthy child going away. So early is always better. Unfortunately, in our community, because of the stigma, because of the Facebookization of America, where we want to hide our problems, I get people bringing children in at later points. I test a lot of kids who are like almost getting ready to go to college, and they're being diagnosed with disorders for the first time. And these are people that have the resources and the money to have private testing. And so that's a real tragedy that because that leaves a mark on your child, right? To
Mhm.
be all those years going through life where they could have been accommodated and their lives could have been easier.
Mhm.
So where does the legal basis for these testing accommodations is the IDEA, and it's an act um, that Disabilities Education Act, right? And that's where you get what you always hear people talk about: IEPs, individual education plan, 504s, which is also a part of IDA, but it's also part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I'm gonna pull the microscope up a little. Basically, the IDEA says your child is entitled to a free and appropriate public education, right? So, and the word appropriate means
Mhm.
for them, appropriate for them. So, the public school system in this country has to come part of the way to give your child most, if not all, of what they need. And they have the right to do it in the most inclusive atmosphere, right? So that if you want your child to not to be in a classroom with other children of differing abilities, you can, and not have them shepherded off to the side, warehouse, or pulled out of class. So depending on what the needs are, you have the right to the least restrictive environment. That's what that's called. So just a little bit, and when your child goes off to college, it becomes then the Americans with Disabilities Act that's the lead legal authority. And for those of you who are curious about workplace accommodations, which I'm going to continue to talk about, because a lot of people could use them and a lot of parents have the same struggles as their children, but they are not getting accommodated. So because the parents are on here, I'm going to keep talking about it. So you can get an accommodation in a school, in an elementary school, in a middle school, in a high school, in a college, in a graduate school, in medical school. You could also get accommodations at your job. And the type of accommodations that you can get in your job is you're entitled to accommodations on the application process so that you're not discriminated against, and in terms of whatever your disability is. You have the authority and the ability to get workplace accommodations based on how the things that you need to physically perform your job, right?
Mhm.
So if you need a computer with a bigger screen, um, if you need a little bit of extra time in assignments, now the workplace is different than schools, and we'll talk more about it. But I just want to make people aware that these things are on the books, and depending on where you're working, you also would have the right under the law to have the not just that you can do your job well, but that you can benefit from the privileges of your job. So, for example, there's a luxury lounge or a gym. There should be accommodations to allow for you to not just be able to do your job, but to enjoy the privileges of them. Okay. So, how do you get
And on that
accommodation?
last point,
Uh-huh.
Dr. Linda, if the job, if an accommodation says this individual needs to move frequently, so they need to get up
Uh-huh.
and go to the
Uh-huh.
gym, at least once a day. Does the
Uh-huh.
employer pay for that? Or Who covers that if there's a cost associated with that?
Well, like for example, the showers and there should be some accommodation, and typically the employer would have to cover it. But as I said, I understand that we're not living in nirvana. We're living in at will states. We're living in meaning employment at will. So I was a part of corporate before I went back to
Mhm.
school. And so I understand that this is not always easy to accomplish. But I wanted to make people aware of it because, a lot of people are suffering in their workplaces. It doesn't just stop at
Right.
college.
Right.
So what are the costs? Right. Tiara's put some resources up there. Thank you so much. What are the costs? So you can get tested if you think that there is something going on with your child. You can get tested. You can ask the school to test them, and then that starts a legal clock where they have to at least evaluate the situation to give you an answer on whether or not they'll test your child. A
Mm.
lot of times it has to do with how your child is doing in school. And if they're doing well, excuse me, they're doing well, you might get some pushback on testing, but they at least have to give you an answer. And they may tell you yes, and they test your child, or they may tell you no. I always tell people, if the school testing doesn't find anything, that doesn't mean that the answer is that you'll never get accommodations. Is because a lot of times the school has the vested interest in not finding anything because they have to remedy it if they find it. So they're not exactly a neutral, disinterested party trying testing your child. And
Mm.
I'm not saying that to scare people away from free testing, because I am definitely all about people getting whatever free resources they can. And a lot of times I tell people, if the school will test them, and then bring me the report so that I can look at it and help you figure out how to like
Mhm.
not pay the full testing fee.
Yeah.
Um, and if you can't get your school to test, of course, there are private testers like myself. But the market rate is fairly high in metropolitan areas for the testing. But there are other resources. So, for example, if you have insurance, a lot of times there are children's hospitals in your area, like in the Washington D.C. metropolitan area. Children's Hospital provides testing for both learning disabilities, and they have an autism clinic. Johns
Mhm.
Hopkins, Kennedy Krieger in Baltimore, their children's branch, Kennedy Krieger, provides all sorts of testing for young people. There's a couple of other hospitals around the Beltway that will take your insurance. Now, the downside is that two things. One is that the waiting lists are really long right now, and post-COVID, it used to be 6 months to a year. Now it's like a year. And a lot of times, if you don't need the answer that quickly, I will refer people to them. And again, and there are some issues that clinics won't cover. Like they don't like to get into disputes with schools, so they may not have a comprehensive list of things that they will cover having to do with the IEP process. There are private testers. I work with one private tester who will take insurance, but the insurance will typically not cover the educational process. So if your child comes out with a diagnosis of a learning disorder, a reading disorder, a math disorder, a writing disorder, then insurance typically won't cover it. So how she does it, I believe, is she splits the cost. So she'll like attribute some of her testing fee to the non-learning things, education things, and some of the fee to the learning things. And so there are a few testers out there that will take insurance, but by and large, the practices that do testing like mine don't take insurance. We do give people super bills, and people take the super bill and they get compensated from the testing companies. And I have clients who've gotten good amounts of the fee from the testing companies.
Mm.
So you need a diagnosis, right? So you can't, even if your child is struggling with something, it doesn't mean that they have a diagnosis. And what I see a lot, particularly in terms of autism and even some reading challenges, is that, and ADHD, is that sometimes your child is struggling, but they're not struggling enough. And so what I tell parents is when you get an inconclusive result, then keep looking, because sometimes with ADHD, the child is intelligent enough at certain levels where they can motor over it, over their difficulties, and they have had compensatory strategies that get them through the sixth grade. But then when they get toward high school, they can't motor over it anymore, and it becomes more and more apparent. So just because you get a conclusive response on one testing doesn't mean that your child doesn't have the ailment. It just means that they, at the time of the testing, they might not meet criteria. So one last thing I want to say about costs. In terms of what you spend over the life of your child, if the testing can help your child get accommodations, help them with their well-being, help them to perform better at school, I think it's an investment. And if you know, and I understand the financial hurdles, but if you think about it, most of the time you only have to have it done once or twice before the child enters college. And, you know, it is a worthy investment if your child is struggling. And I can talk a little bit about people individually about how to find ways to get discounted testing. But I want you to be careful. You know, all testing is not equal. So my second motto is spend the money once, right? If you get cheaper testing and it's not good, I get a lot of requests to basically fix testing, right? Well, they have to pay me my full fee, but they've already paid a lesser fee to someone else. So my thought is be thoughtful about the cost and spend the money once. So
How long does a testing for someone that may not, I don't know everybody on the call, right? So if somebody's exploring it or thinking about
mm,
it, what would the range be just to help people understand what they're looking at?
it
Does
depends on where
insurance
you
cover it?
live. It depends on where you live. Like the DMV is in the 4,000 to 5,000, 5,500 range right now. Um, in New York, it's more. You know, I was just in New York, and I had a someone tell me that their fee was like $7,800.
Mm.
So it depends on where you are. And but I just am like, be careful. I know it's expensive, I know it's burdensome, but Kelli, I wanted to say that for the purposes of standardized testing, I try to help people with the timing of their tests. So if you come to me and the school is already accommodating, but you know you're going to another school that won't necessarily do that, I might tell you to wait a year, because if I test your child before they enter high school, that testing should take them through junior year for the purposes of standardized testing. Most kids test before their senior year now, and they would only have to do it once,
Mm,
you know. And
right.
a lot of the colleges, particularly in the advent of COVID, do not really require, you know, they might not be so pushy about you getting tested.
Again, like a second time. Is that what you mean?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, to update it.
Right.
But I try to help people so that they can time it, so they may only have to get it done twice, you know.
Mm,
And I try to help them work the system so that they could spend less money over time.
mm-hmm.
But these are things that you need to know about because you wouldn't think to ask,
Right.
right? And so that's why I wanted to have this show about accommodations. Um, so the in the chat is that someone was talking about their child being diagnosed in middle school with ADHD and an inattentive type. He's considered twice exceptional, which means that he has strong intellectual capabilities, but something like ADHD that's interfering with his executive functioning. High IQ but struggles with executive functioning. It's hard to measure for accommodations. And she says it was a short battle, but got a 504 and took care of the issues and misperceptions that they were having at school. So again, this mom is savvy about the process. She understands that even though her child is very bright, he might have issues like with completing things. Like a lot of times when I worked in schools, Kelli, um, I was that person at a private school in Bethesda where I worked the room where the kids had the separate testing rooms. And sometimes the kids would just fail to turn over the test, right? And so they would only do one side, but I was there checking, and it was like, and then I'd make them go back and check again. And oftentimes, this was an all boys school. When they went back, they would always sigh or gasp because they missed something that was easily spottable if they just went to check it over again. So you can have a very bright child who cannot perform well because, again, this is one of my points. School does not test your intellect. School does not test your heart. School does not test hard work. It measures production. What can you produce on that given day? And if you have some kind of interference from ADHD, a learning disability, anxiety, autism, that interferes with production. So know, parents, that you can have a very bright child, but there's interferences with production, right? Is that register that your child is not dumb, your child is not unintelligent, but they have production issues. I think that this is helpful for parents to understand, and that they're not lazy. That's another thing I want to bring up. It's like, they're not lazy. Stop saying that they're lazy. Let's try to figure out what they are, right? What's happening. But calling them lazy and calling them lazy to their face is often counterproductive. Okay, so I got about 3-4 more minutes, and then I want you all to talk to me.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
here's the lessons that I've learned from doing this since I switched careers, right? And I'm teaching it now again at George Washington. One, use that long runway, y'all. Test your kids early. Don't listen to the people in your home, even grandma saying, there's nothing wrong with that boy. Listen to your guts, moms and dads. Don't keep it to yourself, right? Don't keep it to yourself. We hide. We want everything to be perfect. We want to post on Facebook, our child's on the honor roll. I'm not playing any of that down, but it means that we hide. And it also makes us feel isolated because we feel like we're the only person that's going through it. But that's not true. Up to 10% of the kids have 6 to 10% have learning disorders, 6 to 10% have ADHD. So we're talking about a good amount of kids, and all of us have some kind of learning glitches, right? Understand that the thought of you having that perfect child who's a perfect intellect, a perfect athlete, a perfect citizen, going from that to the realization that your child has some learning glitches and that we need to adjust our thinking, it's a process. And a lot of that process involves grieving, right? Grieving that child that we had in our minds, right? And so again, like what I do has a lot to do with the testing, but it has a lot to do with taking parents through this process. Know that parents, a lot of times, the things that our children are struggling with come to them via inheritance. And so I've tested a lot of parents after I tested their kids, right?
I
And
was
so,
just about to ask about that. So you
yep.
do parents
Mhm,
in
mhm.
addition to,
Yeah,
oh,
I mean, and I, it's been what I call an inadvertent specialty, right? where,
Mhm.
people are saying, well, I need to take that series test in financial services, or I need to, and there, trust you guys, there are accommodations for all of those tests. So for those of you who are listening out there, or someone, your cousin can't pass the test, talk to them about this discussion today, because that's why we're doing it. So if one person goes out and gets a diagnosis and gets help and is living a less stressful, anxious life where they think less of themselves, then Kelli and I would have accomplished our mission today. We also got to work on our own trauma, because as parents, we as Black parents are traumatized. We are terribly frightened that something's going to be wrong with our child, and that they're going to get off path, and they're going to become a statistic. And these fears are not without a basis in reality. So know that I'm going to take you through the talk about trauma, and I'm going to talk to you about our fears about stigma. But what I tell parents all the time, what's the lesser of two evils, right? Is it better to diagnose your child with a learning disorder or reading disorder and get support, or is it better to fear the stigma and not get them help, where they may not be able to go through school, or they go through school with anxiety in addition to the reading? Because your child knows at a very young age that they are operating differently than other children. They know this. I tested 4 and 5 year olds for years for admissions into private schools. And as young as that age, they know that they are not performing at the level of their peers. Slow and steady wins the race, y'all. People ask me, if there's a diagnosis, what is the best way to get results? And I've had this talk with so many parents. Slow and steady, right? They're not cured overnight. The children that do the best are when the parents understand, accept the diagnosis, help the child accept the diagnosis, and get, get them at home every day, unpack that backpack, do the things that you got to do, buy the reading program, get the summer reading tutoring, the therapist, the parent guidance, all of the things with a long runway we can do. Also, you got to play to your child's strengths. What about, find the things that they're good at? And so while we're dealing with the other issues, and I know we have a couple of parents on here who have champion athletes and champion artists, I emphasize the strengths, right? Go to their strengths, help them to take care of themselves. You, as parents, when the children are younger, you have to advocate for them. So you'll get these long testing reports from me that has, like maybe 20 recommendations. What I tell the parent is, what are the 3 things that are going to help your child get through the day? And what I advise parents to do is, the first couple of weeks of school, go talk to the teacher when they're young. Then you're training your child to do that, because when they get to college, they get to high school, they have to go get the accommodations on their own. They have to take their letter. They have to take their testing report. But at first, figure out what are the 3 things that are going to make a difference with your child. Is it, you need Dr. McGhee to make sure that they take their books home? I had a kid who could never take his books home, right? So we had to figure out how to get him to take his books home. One of the things I did is I got them used books at home, right? So he had another set of books, right? A lot of times in divorce situations, I put sets of books at both houses, right? Because it's just too much to get parents coordinated. Finally, I want us to deal with our child's mental health first. Nothing comes without stable mental health. So a lot of times I'm telling parents that the calculus grade is not driving here. What is driving is that your child is anxiety and depression. And if I can get them feeling better mood wise and better about themselves, then I can work on their calculus grade or how to figure it out. Trust me, you all, there are ways for your child to get to college. There are ways to cure those C's on the transcript, or worse on the transcript. We can talk about that. Ask me if you want to know. But
Yes, I just want to do a double click on that because I think that
mhm,
what you're saying, I now understand after the fact.
mhm,
I did not understand during those really critical high school years where I
right.
thought what really mattered was the grades and
Mhm,
having the right grades and having the right transcript to
mhm,
get into school. At the end of the day, I'm so clear. There's 3,000 something schools. There's a school for
mhm,
everybody, number one. Number two, certain children may not want to go to school. And number
right.
three, the grades don't matter if your head and heart aren't right, you know,
Yes,
and
and
that's
that
key.
brings that is so amazing, Kelly, because every 18-year-old is not ready for college.
Or
Okay,
even 21-year-old.
I'm gonna hey, but it's okay. You can still go to your links meeting with your head up. Okay, I'm really trying to keep it real here. It's okay if your child doesn't go to college. It's okay. I had a woman say to me, um, well, she just came out to the table. She's like, my son is at home in my basement. And I was just I didn't even know this woman, and I was so proud of her. We're struggling right now to figure out what he needs to do. And I was just so incredibly proud of her. And finally, with regard to testing, find a good professional. It's not necessarily the best name or the most well-known name. Find people, don't just listen and get the first recommendation of the hottest tester. You want people that are culturally competent, and you want them to be savvy about the process. Because, like I said, having this experience with law school and MCAT admissions and all of these kinds of ways, certain things you're not going to get. And if your tester is not good, the LSAT people will reject you, and then or the SAT people will reject you, and then you will not get the accommodation because getting them on appeal is extremely rare. And I worked a lot on appeals cases, but the average tester doesn't. So to know that you got one shot at this. So if you pick the wrong tester, you pick the person because someone else used them. Ask questions. How many do you work with ADHD? Do you test, especially for autism? Do you test for autism? Right? Get the right tester. And so with that, I am going to throw this open, and see if people have questions.
I have a question about that last part because something was hitting me around um, testing for our children and also testing for ourselves, which is like a light bulb went off for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, do you ever, you, Dr. Linda, do you, or would you be willing, I guess, to create some sort of virtual safe space testing for SonRise people?
Mm-hmm.
Whereby there could be a an online, you have to go into a safe area, I don't know, but like, or maybe
To
breakout
talk more
rooms or
about
something
testing.
to talk, not just talk about it, to do it, where you would be administering the test in different breakout rooms because people here are all over the country.
So there are, particularly with regard to mood and certain issues, and even some ADHD related testing, there are ways to do that. And maybe we could talk a little bit more offline about that, because it's also very individualistic.
I see.
Like I'd be very wary about, categorizing people and grouping people all together. So we need to have a thoughtful process about
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Um, and someone pointed out, I mentioned it, but it bears repeating, that after high school, you don't use the special ed laws and process, you use the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that applies in all spaces. It's the law. And that grades are subjective, and that is very true. And they children perform differently in different environments, and that is also true. Again, we have to look at, where is our child? Are they in the best atmosphere? Just because they're
Mhm.
in the best quote unquote school that might not be the environment for them. And Kelly and I have had numerous conversations about that. What happens in college when the professors won't provide accommodations and the child fails the final? Yes, you can push back on the issue, but the thing is that you need to push back early. Okay. When the moment they don't get the accommodations, take your test. Your testing should be on file. What I do with my clients that are going to college is I have them make an appointment with the disabilities office or the student services, wherever it's housed on campus, before they even get there. And when you get there, when you take your child, you should go with your child and go to the student services or the disabilities office or whatever it's called with the testing report. Right? That should be done on the first few days of campus, of going on campus. So if you have an issue, you already have a testing report on file. You can't do this all after the fact, but you can, even if you get a decision you don't want, you can go to the deans, you could go to the dean of your school, you can go to the dean of the disability support, you could go to financial aid and make the argument that your child didn't get the accommodations, therefore they got a lower grade. But those arguments are best made earlier rather than later. Someone asked me about IEP versus 504. Is one better than the other? Okay, so I have to give a little bit of background here. The IEP is supposed to be for learning disorders. And so that means reading, writing, and math. 504s are what they're supposed to be called other health impairments, and ADHD is categorized as other health impairment. There are also 504s for other health issues. I deal a lot with kids who have multiple combinations of both physical ailments and like learning ailments and our learning differences, to use a more positive term. So the question is, which is best, the IEP or the 504? At first, people would always tell me that the IEPs were better, but I have stopped arguing for IEPs over 504s. I look at who's willing, no matter what the plan is, to give my kid, the kid that I'm advocating for, the accommodation that they need. If it's under a 504, okay, that's fine. But if it's under an IEP, that's fine also. I now no longer believe that the IEP is superior in terms of getting kids what they need. Anybody have any questions that they want to ask with their voice as opposed to in the chat? Or anybody want to feel comfortable sharing their experiences through testing or want to advocate for it?
Had a great experience, obviously, with you, Dr. Linda, testing both boys. So just want to say thank you again for being so wonderful through that whole process. And sometimes the information you give, it comes, you can hear it differently if it comes from a person that really cares deeply. And so I want to double click on having the right person or somebody that really has both cultural sensitivity and also genuine care for
I'm going to call on someone, but I want to just make a couple of points clear. It's a long process.
Yes.
Because of COVID, we're behind. So understand, if you need testing now, you may not get testing to December or November. It's in my office, we test over 3 appointments that are 2 hours each. And then you get feedback and then you get a report. But that process is not a quick process. So just to make that clear, I think there's a hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Linda. Good morning, Kelly.
Hey, how you?
Doing good.
Good morning.
So there were 2 comments I wanted to make. One regarding the person's question regarding the IEP versus the 504. I will say the chief difference is the IEP is a legally binding document where the 504 is not. So that is the clearest distinction based on the type of accommodations you think your child needs. So if it's something severe enough, um, that you feel that if you want to take to court, or if they're not providing those modifications or accommodations, I definitely would push for the IEP. Um,
Yeah,
so
I
that
hear
to
you.
me,
I definitely
yeah.
hear you on that. I definitely hear you on that.
And then the other comment regarding accommodations in other spaces that you mentioned, just to give people an example outside of the educational space.
Mm-hmm.
My 22-year-old has autism spectrum disorder and an intellectual disability. And one of his goals was to get his permit and his driver's license. And we went to the MVA outside of our area for him to take the test, and no less than 20 times he took it, and no less than 20 times he failed it. And I
Mm.
formally requested accommodations for him at the MVA. And that was a challenge because they were limited in what they were willing to offer. But again, under ADA, he was entitled to reasonable accommodation. So, with meetings with the Maryland Department of Transportation and others, they agreed to our accommodation because the issue that I had was that the test wasn't written in plain language,
Mm-hmm.
and in many states, plain language is a language. And so, for people that don't know what plain language is, it is the lowest common denominator of language. So instead of using words like agile, you would say flexible, just so
Mm-hmm.
that, in layman's terms. And so after our case, our situation, the MVA decided to work with the council that I'm on, and they rewrote the entire manual in plain language for everyone, not just for my son, but for everyone in the state of Maryland, because they realized that changing the language in that booklet helps more than just a person with a learning difference. It benefits all of us. So I'll post about it on my social media later, but that is one way that you can get accommodations in your
Mm-hmm.
community
Mm-hmm.
under ADA. So I just wanted to let people know the scale to which you're entitled to support.
Right.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so, so much for advocating for not just your child, but for other people's children also, because one of the sort of areas of that can boost a child's self-esteem is the ability to be independent. And driving is a big part of that. So, and fortunately in Maryland, I have noticed that there is some flexibility in terms of the state laws and the way that they apply them. But it's just so tremendous that, you know, parents are out there advocating for their children, but they're not just advocating for their children, they're advocating for everyone.
It's great. There's another great comment from Tiara. Do you want to read that one?
Yes, it's just she works in the civil rights space, heard a lot of people speak on this topic, but never heard about anyone speaking in this way. Yes, there are laws on the book, but there is a game that must be played. Yes, right.
Mhm.
Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for that because the reason why I started there is because I have a lot of parents that come to me and they don't want to ask for accommodations. And and I'm like, are you aware that at the blank private school that 40% of the kids are getting accommodations? So there's a thought in our community sometimes that they want to do it without accommodations, or they don't want people to think that their kid is not as bright, or some of the other stigma related barriers that we have. And all the kids next to your kid is getting accommodations, and guess what, they're doing better because of them. And so that the mental part of parents seeking accommodations, particularly parents of color, is very, very important.
One interesting thing I'll share that I didn't know is that if you have accommodations and your child ever decides that they want to go into the armed services, military, academies, etc., those are not looked upon as a positive. And so it speaks volumes around um, the importance of changing the stereotype and the stigma around mental well-being and around 504s and IEPs and all these things, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with needing a little bit of extra time to take a test if that's how your brain functions. There's nothing wrong with
I,
it. But I'd love to have you speak on that because
I
Mhm.
knew a little bit about this from before, but I'm going to be honest with y'all. Kelli has given me quite the education in the past few weeks about the military situation. And I also know someone who's been trying to contract with the military, the Naval Academy, and I'm hoping that she does. Um, I, I cannot believe the system that sort of leads people to believe that we don't need accommodations here or accommodations are bad here, and somehow we have smooth functioning men and women here across the board. um it's just absolutely um it's just absolutely mind-boggling that one of the military establishments has this sort of, for lack of a better word, gaslighting about this situation. But I still think that if you can get your child through the process, then you can still advocate for your child's needs while after they get accepted.
That's right.
Um, and I
And I
guess
don't want to call one place out. I think it's just a point about all of our armed services
oh
and some
yes,
old
yes, absolutely.
amputated.
We're not calling anyone out. And
Right.
also, this could happen outside of the military establishment also, because even people that have things on their books in the colleges, all colleges are not created equally. Okay. I am just going to say that. And I have kids who run into problems at all places. So I definitely don't want to single out the military. But again, you have to work with your child to advocate for themselves. So let's say they are really struggling academically at a place that is not providing accommodations. So that means that they might talk to their professors, right? That means that parents, I was very reluctant. We're not dealing with learning disorders here, but I'm going to be honest with you. I was very reluctant to call a college for any reason. My son went to two. But during COVID, they had University of Maryland had a very arbitrary drop ed deadline that they just dropped in the middle of COVID. And I called the business school and I complained about it. And apparently enough parents called because they reversed that rule. So sometimes parents, you got to get involved and you got to call that dean because they don't want unhappy paying parents. Okay. So, if things don't seem fair, call for help, call your child's advisor. Of course, you have to have FERPA permissions in place. Otherwise, they will not talk to you. But you can send an email, right? And just say this policy is not fair. It doesn't have anything to do with your child's privacy. But know that all colleges are not created equally, and there are colleges that help more. And number two, there are colleges that specialize in executive functioning disorders, that specialize in learning disorders. And if any of you are interested, you can find me and we can type private consultation about your child's testing, your child's what's happening with them, and consult about like the future. Because it's a static piece of paper, but what we need to do is make sure that your child is okay.
Hey, Dr. Linder, I wanted to, hello, everybody. I wanted to make a quick parallel comparison for folks who are hesitant about accommodations, et cetera. So just walk with me for a second. So when I was applying to college and doing all my testing or whatever, I had these pretty good grades or whatever. But when I took the SAT, I did not do, the SAT prep courses, et cetera, et cetera. So when I took the test the first time, well, the only time actually, I got a pretty good grade. But what I realized later was that lots of people around me, lots of other students had taken the prep courses and, they're taking it multiple times. And for me, I didn't want to take it again. And as I think about it as an adult, it sounds crazy. I didn't want to take it again because I thought if I got a better or if I got a worse grade, then the first grade would be a fluke, if that makes sense, right? So the comparison I'm making is that had I used all of the resources that were available to me, i.e. use the prep course, maybe taking it again without worrying about a stigma of what that would look like, I would have probably done even better. Luckily, I was okay and was able to get off to college and get into the schools I wanted. But the point of that is, if you're looking at the accommodations, like, I don't want the stigma that goes along with it, and it may somehow affect me. I can personally attest that it affected me in a negative way. And had I not thought that way, I would have taken it again and, try to do better on the section that I thought I should have done better on. So if that makes any sense.
And yes, it does. And I really appreciate you speaking out, because I think boys in many ways are most reluctant to seek and accept help and to understand that they would do better. But, admissions, money, scholarships. I asked my son to take the SAT twice, because he was 10 points away from a full scholarship at one school. And when he left the first SAT, he said, we didn't visit those chapters in math. We haven't done those chapters, the ones that I missed. So I was like, well, if you do those chapters, you might as well just go take the SATs again. Sure enough, he got the points. So getting, understanding, again, this is a game, right? Like, if you could get a full scholarship that's valued at $300,000, right? It might be worth asking your child to take the test again. It might be worth it to have your child tested if they are not doing well, if they're running out of time. That's how a lot of African American clients get to me, is because the kids their grades are decent, but the standardized testing trips them up because of the timing. I think we're over now, Kelli.
We are right at 10 o'clock. I was gonna say we could go on and on and on. I lost track of time today.
You know what? But we will revisit this topic.
Yes.
We will revisit this topic, because I'd love to do a show on adults.
I think so. And one of the things I think we should explore is how would it be possible? I don't know what it looks like, but I know anything is possible. How we could create testing, not group, but some sort of virtual, and we can talk about that.
And really quickly, I know we're over, everybody, but I just want you to know, one of the other things that I'm working on is, my dream is to get more African Americans and people of color in the pipeline that are testing. We are very, very small percentage of testers. And to get the training pipeline, I want to work with one of the HBCUs and establish a training program. Absolutely. And have that be open to all HBCU students. So that's my dream. I'm throwing it out there. I'm hoping that somebody out there is listening and it's going to help.
I'm listening. And we work with the Higher Education Leadership Foundation on a whole bunch of stuff with HBCU. So yes, I'm listening. I would love to speak with you about that more. So thank you, Dr. Linda. And you're right, we need it tremendously in our medical field. I want to say one quick last thing as well. So Dr. Linda has graciously agreed to be with us on the first Sunday of every month as a trained clinical psychologist, and also just, been here since day one of SonRise, and a constant friend and mentor of mine. And so she will be here on the first Sunday of every month, sometimes it might be an open session, sometimes it'll be a topic, but always with love and incredible expertise. So I want to share that. And then I want to also say, Sylvia High asked that I remind people about the I Am Woman conference. I put it in the chat. She's offering $100 off, which is awesome. I think it goes down to $200 a person, including meals, and it is in Atlanta in 20 days. So it's a Saturday and Sunday. I have been there every year. It's well worth it. If you can get to Atlanta, I put the link. It's IamWomanConference.com, and the code for the $100 off is SonRise, just like it's spelled here, SON Rise. So if anybody can make it, feel free. She would love to have you. And with that, it's 10:03. I'm going to turn it over to Tiara. And yes, Dr. Linda saying SAT optional is our friend, and it removes a lot of stress to have SAT optional schools on our list. It also is, just note that one of the schools one of my kids applied to said, well, yeah, he said, well, I thought it was optional. And she said, but does that mean that you don't get to take it? It was just an interesting question. So I think that's a really interesting conversation for another time as well. When it's optional, doesn't necessarily mean it's really optional. So just a thought, and for another day. But thank you for being here, Dr. Linda. As always, such great information. Appreciate you. Thank you, Dee, for speaking up, and for all the other folks who chimed in. Appreciate it. And we'll be here next week with a woman named Dr. Liz. And the topic is how to reduce conflict with our teens. She has a book around reducing conflict and how to better connect with our teens and young adults. So her name is Dr. Liz. Her name is Elizabeth Henry, MD. So she's a pediatrician and has written this really incredible book that I've listened to on Audible. All right. With that, turning it over to Tiara to close us out with a prayer. Thank you so much.
So, Father God, we thank you for another Sunrise Sunday. We thank you for Kelli and family again for providing this platform. We thank you for the gem that is Dr. Linda McGhee. We thank you for her transparency and that she was bold enough to speak truth to us today. We know that the truth makes us free, and we pray that parents listening, both now and later, are no longer bound by the stigma of mental health diagnoses. We pray that parents everywhere are empowered to adequately advocate for each of their children's needs without reluctance, without shame, without retaliation. We thank you, God. We pray your blessing over each and every person on this call and their families. May they have a powerful, peaceful, positive, and productive week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Tiara. Appreciate you so much. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful day and week, and we'll see you next Sunday.